An explanation for consciousness is one of the greatest unsolved problems of modern science. We know what it means to us implicitly because we're constantly experiencing it every second of our waking life. But when it comes to trying to define it or explain it explicitly, we end up going around in circles, or we just get lost trying to figure out where to start. This raises the obvious question of what exactly is consciousness? What causes or influences it? Why are we conscious? And what does this mean for us as a species? In order to better understand what consciousness may be, we first need to trace back the origins of consciousness and understand why we are aware in the first place. Consciousness likely evolved via evolution by natural selection. The original goal of consciousness was likely to direct a living thing towards a fresh supply of food and away from predators who considered them food. Smaller creatures didn't evolve this basic form of consciousness as they did not have to worry as much about trying to find food, especially if they were ocean-dwelling microbes. This was because smaller organisms, such as microbes, didn't require as much energy as did, say, a large land-dwelling creature. This ability to move oneself towards food and away from predators through the use of the senses would be the first step towards consciousness as we know it today. This would then be followed by the second step, which featured the addition of a new sort of perception, which existed beyond smelling and hearing and was capable of working at a distance. This new form of perception was vision, and it served to add depth and context to our surroundings, giving us a better sense of the world we inhabited. The third step on the staircase towards modern consciousness was the addition of having constant awareness of one's goals and needs through memory. With memory, organisms could retain info about what was beneficial to them, what didn't affect them, and what was harmful to them. Another huge step forward was the ability to perceive time. Concepts such as object permanence, the idea that an object continues to exist even when we can't see it, and delayed gratification, rewarding greater amounts of something that is desired just for having waited longer, are abilities that involve a basic sense of time. Our discussion of consciousness is furthered when we talk about language and speech, which enable us to construct hypotheses about the world around us, make detailed plans, and communicate them with other people. Words also enable us to think about ourselves and our own place in the universe. It even enables us to think about our own consciousness. Another way by which we can try to understand more about consciousness is by investigating the effects that disease and mental disorders may have on someone's consciousness. One such disorder is known as anosognosia and has a noticeable effect on the human consciousness. The disorder is characterized by a loss of motor control in a limb. However, the afflicted individual denies that they are not able to move the affected limb. When they are asked to move the limb, they are, as expected, unable to move it. However, when asked why they didn't move their limb, they would come up with an excuse as to why they didn't do it. Even more interesting is the case of visual anosognosia, in which a subject is cortically blind, but claims that they can see just fine. If you were to ask a person with this condition a question involving their visual sense, they will usually just guess, and when they are wrong, they will explain their inaccuracy with an excuse. People with anosognosia possess a disconnect between what they're experiencing and their conscious awareness of it. They don't know that they can't see or can't move their limb because the part of the brain responsible for telling them those things isn't telling them anything at all. It's not even telling them that there is no visual or motor input. This forces the parts of the brain that are responsible for answering questions or creating speech to come up with a made-up response. Another disorder which falls into the category of being a consciousness disorder is hemispatial neglect. This disorder is characterized by being unaware of everything on one half of a person's body due to damage of one of the brain's hemispheres. If an individual with hemispatial neglect were presented with two photos of the same house with the only difference between the houses being a visible fire coming out of a window on the side of the photo, which they are unable to process awarely, they would not notice the difference between either house. However, if you asked them which house they would rather live in, the individual would eagerly pick the one without the fire, not once, but every single time they were shown in the photos. This indicates that even though the individual may not be actively aware of the disparity, they are unconsciously registering the fact that one house is on fire while the other isn't, indicating that one's own awareness of a situation and the decisions they may make aren't necessarily linked with one another. although awareness does help to clarify the decisions made. In the end, the discussion of consciousness is one of great debate and controversy, and there are many ways to go about trying to understand it. For the time being, however, science doesn't have an answer to consciousness, let alone an approach to finding that answer. If we are ever to unravel the mystery behind consciousness, we will need to continue experimenting with a plethora of different ideas behind the phenomenon, as well as figure out novel ways to test established theories as well as new ones. In short, the only way we'll be able to uncover the mysteries of the mind is through research, and hopefully one day we will have the answers to some of the biggest questions in neuroscience, including the question of consciousness and its true nature.